Have you ever wondered what secrets might be hidden within the dusty archives of religious history? What if the stories we've been told are only one part of a much larger, more complex picture? Today, we're diving deep into some of the most fascinating and controversial topics that the mainstream church often keeps under wraps. We're not here to challenge anyone's faith, but to explore the rich and often mysterious tapestry of history that has shaped what we believe today. So, grab your thinking cap, because we're about to journey back in time. First up, let's talk about the Gnostic Gospels. You've probably heard of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But what about the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, or the Gospel of Philip? These are just a few of the many texts discovered in 1945 near Nag Hammadi, Egypt. They paint a very different picture of Jesus and his teachings. For instance, the Gospel of Thomas is a collection of sayings attributed to Jesus, and it emphasizes attaining enlightenment and salvation through secret knowledge, or gnosis, rather than through faith and divine grace alone. It suggests that the kingdom of God is within you, a concept that empowers the individual in a way that organized religion sometimes doesn't. Why were these texts excluded from the Bible? Well, in the early centuries of Christianity, there were many competing versions of the faith. The version that eventually became Orthodox Christianity, championed by figures like Bishop Irenaeus, needed to establish a clear, unified doctrine. The Gnostic texts, with their diverse and often mystical interpretations, were seen as a threat to this unity and were labeled as heresy. Their exclusion was a key moment in centralizing the Church's power and creating a single, authoritative narrative. Next, let's explore the intriguing figure of Mary Magdalene. For centuries, she was portrayed as a repentant prostitute, a sinner saved by Jesus. But is that accurate? This portrayal largely comes from a sermon by Pope Gregory the Great in the 6th century, where he conflated several different women from the Gospels into one person. However, if you look at the biblical texts themselves, there's no evidence that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. In fact, she's named as a prominent follower of Jesus, one who supported his ministry financially and was the first person to witness his resurrection. The Gnostic Gospels, like the Gospel of Mary, take this even further. They depict her not just as a follower, but as a leader, a confidant of Jesus who understood his teachings on a deeper level than even the male disciples. She's often called the apostle to the apostles. This raises a huge question: was Mary Magdalene's role intentionally downplayed in later tradition? Some scholars argue that in a patriarchal society, a female leader was a radical and uncomfortable idea for the early church hierarchy. By recasting her as a redeemed sinner, her authority was neutralized, paving the way for an exclusively male-led institution. It's a fascinating what-if of history. Now, let's touch on the concept of reincarnation. Today, it's mostly associated with Eastern religions like Hinduism and Buddhism. But what if I told you that it was once a part of early Christian thought? Believe it or not, some early Christian thinkers and groups, known as the Gnostics, and even some prominent figures like the theologian Origen of Alexandria, entertained the idea of the pre-existence of souls and their journey through multiple lives. Origen, one of the most brilliant scholars of the early church, proposed that souls were created before our physical bodies and that we are sent to earth to learn and grow, potentially over many lifetimes, until we are pure enough to return to God. This idea, called apokatastasis, suggests the eventual salvation of all beings. So what happened? Why is this idea completely absent from modern Christianity? The concept was formally condemned as heresy at the Second Council of Constantinople in 553 AD. The Emperor Justinian was a major force behind this decision. Why? A belief in reincarnation could potentially lessen the urgency of salvation in this one life, which in turn could undermine the Church's authority and its role as the sole gatekeeper to heaven. By insisting on a single life followed by eternal judgment, the stakes were raised, making the Church's guidance absolutely essential. Let's shift gears to the lost books of the Bible. The Bible as we know it is a curated collection of texts. The process of deciding which books made the cut, known as canonization, took centuries and was full of debate. But what about the books that didn't make it? We're not just talking about the Gnostic Gospels. There are dozens of other texts, often called the Apocrypha or Pseudepigrapha, that were widely read by early Christians and Jews. For example, the Book of Enoch. This book is actually quoted in the New Testament's Book of Jude. It's an epic text filled with visions of heaven and hell, fallen angels who interbreed with humans to create giants, and detailed prophecies. It was incredibly influential in the Second Temple period, the time of Jesus, and it shaped many early Christian ideas about angels, demons, and the end times. So why isn't it in most Bibles today? The reasons are complex. As the Christian canon was formalized, preference was given to texts that were believed to be written by the apostles or their close associates. Books like Enoch, with their complex mythology and uncertain authorship, were eventually sidelined. The Protestant Reformation further trimmed the canon, with figures like Martin Luther questioning the divine inspiration of certain books. It reminds us that the Bible wasn't just handed down from heaven as a complete package, it was assembled by human hands through a process of selection and exclusion. Another powerful secret is the historical context of Jesus' life. We often imagine Jesus in a sort of spiritual vacuum, but he lived during a time of immense political and social turmoil. Judea was under Roman occupation, and there were dozens of different Jewish sects and revolutionary movements. Many Jews were expecting a Messiah, but their idea of a Messiah was often a powerful, political, and military leader who would overthrow the Romans and restore Israel's sovereignty. Figures like the Zealots advocated for violent rebellion. When Jesus spoke of a kingdom of God, it would have had powerful political undertones for his audience. Was he just a spiritual teacher, or was he seen as a potential revolutionary leader? The Romans certainly seemed to think the latter. His crucifixion, a form of punishment reserved for enemies of the state and rebels, is a huge clue. The charge placed over his head, King of the Jews, was a political accusation. The Church, especially after it became the state religion of the Roman Empire, had a strong incentive to depoliticize Jesus. Emphasizing his spiritual, otherworldly teachings made him a much safer figure for an empire that had once executed him as a threat. But ignoring the revolutionary context of his time means we might be missing a crucial dimension of who he was and what his message meant to the people who first heard it. Finally, let's talk about the origins of major Christian holidays. Did you know that Christmas and Easter have deep roots in pre-Christian or pagan traditions? Christmas, the celebration of Jesus' birth on December 25th, doesn't actually have a date mentioned in the Bible. In fact, most historians believe Jesus was likely born in the spring. So why December 25th? This date coincides almost perfectly with major pagan festivals celebrating the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. The Romans celebrated Saturnalia, a week-long festival of feasting and gift-giving, and the festival of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, on December 25th. As Christianity spread, the early church found it easier to absorb and repurpose these popular festivals rather than abolish them. It was a clever strategy: take a beloved tradition and give it a new, Christian meaning. The same is true for Easter. Its name is likely derived from Easter, a Germanic goddess of spring and fertility. The symbols of Easter, like eggs and rabbits, are ancient symbols of new life and fertility that have nothing to do with the resurrection story itself. They were incorporated into the Christian celebration to make it more familiar and acceptable to newly converted pagans. This doesn't invalidate the religious meaning of these holidays for believers today, but it reveals a history of cultural blending and adaptation that is rarely discussed in Sunday school. So, from Gnostic Gospels and the true role of Mary Magdalene to reincarnation, lost books, and the pagan roots of holidays, it's clear that religious history is far more complex and colorful than we often imagine. These aren't just trivia, they are pieces of a puzzle that show how beliefs evolve, how institutions build their power, and how human stories are told and retold over centuries. Exploring these hidden corners of history doesn't have to weaken faith. For many, it can enrich it, adding layers of context and humanity to ancient traditions. It encourages us to ask questions, to think critically, and to appreciate the incredible journey our beliefs have taken to get to where they are today. What do you think? Which of these topics fascinates you the most? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into the hidden side of history, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries of our past. Thanks for watching.